The name of our course is ZoomIntoGita. This is who we are, Loka and Vidarbha. So the greatest, this is Mother Teresa. She says that the greatest impoverishment is the poverty of the heart. So this is so we see that, you know, there is great wealth, great innovations being made, and yet we find that in the midst of such great affluence, we still feel empty within the heart. There's in fact a book called Affluenza, which shows the nature of you know, people in the modern era, where we have so much of everything and yet we seem to lack a connection. So this Bhagavad-Gita, somebody might say, so what does the word Bhagavad-Gita really mean? So the word Bhagavad-Gita, if you break it up into two parts, the word Bhagavad means the divine, the supreme person, the supreme beloved, and Gita, the word Gita means a song. So it means the song of the supreme beloved, or it means the song of the supreme divine. Now this song is actually has great significance, because it is described in another very ancient text called the Brahma Samhita, where it says that in the spiritual dimension, every word is a song and every step is a dance. And so this song that we're going to be reading about and contemplating and discussing is actually a song that is divine and it is spiritual, and it has the power to actually eradicate this poverty of our heart. So, you know, in the shamanic tradition,
there is in the ancient shamanic tradition, when somebody feels depressed or they feel low, and then they go to a shaman, then the first thing they ask him or her is that, when did you stop dancing? When did you stop being enchanted by stories? And when did you stop singing? So this song is actually the original frequency of the soul, and Bhagavad-Gita actually is also a love call. It is a love call made by the Supreme Lord Krishna to every living entity who is actually an eternal part of that Supreme, and that love is always there. So by this Bhagavad-Gita allows us to tune into our innermost frequency and respond to this love call and this love song.
It's very interesting, because we're all looking for a song, and this is something that we just came across and we found it so interesting. So just wanted to share this. There is apparently a tribe in Africa called the Himba tribe, is
Himba
it?
Tribe.
The Himba tribe. And one of the things that I found so fascinating about one of the tradition is that before a child actually is conceived, the mother actually goes under a tree and she sits there and she meditates, and then she meditates on a song. And then during conception and also during the birth of a child, that same song is sung. And then through the course of the child's life, in different milestones, that song is actually sung to the child over and over again. And finally, at the time of death, that same song is actually sung to the person as he leaves this world. And so that song sort of becomes the song of his life. So we were thinking that how this Bhagavad-Gita is also a song that actually accompanies every living spark through countless lifetimes. As he journeys through different lifetimes, this song can actually accompany and in turn create that sense of, and the reason they do that is that sound actually creates a safe place. It creates a place where that as life changes happens, there is one thread that stays the same, and that person can always go back to that thread.
And we always have some kind of song going in our mind. It could be something that we want, something that we like, something that we dislike. So there's so many songs going on in our head all the time. And by focusing on this song of the Bhagavad-Gita, if we can make it the song of our life, then especially at the time of leaving this body, we are able to remember this song, and which really means a great destination for us in our next life. So
actually every verse of the Bhagavad-Gita is actually a song, and it can be sung. And so maybe one day we could actually come together and sing the whole Bhagavad-Gita together. That'll be so beautiful. And it's Sanskrit poetry, and it's just, the vibration is very, very healing. And so that's kind of, the whole thing about this divine love song. And the purpose of this song really is to attract, and it's an invitation to all people, all sparks of that supreme divinity to come and engage in this in the spiritual dance and reunite with the supreme being. So that is the purpose. And we see here that Mahatma Gandhi, there are great, testimonials.
People who have been touched by this song.
Yeah, people who have been touched by this song. Go ahead.
Like Mahatma Gandhi, you can read it here. He says, when doubts haunt me, when disappointments stare me in the face, and I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to the Bhagavad-Gita and find a verse to comfort me, and I immediately begin to smile in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. Those who meditate on the Gita will derive fresh joy and new meanings from it every day. So much relevant in today's day and time when people, and all of us are struggling with the current situation.
And this is Emerson, and he actually, it's very nice actually. I'm thinking what I should do first. In November of 1857, I'm going to first share this and then read that. In November of 1857, he made one of the most dramatic declarations of his affection for the Bhagavad-Gita. He contributed a poem which was entitled Brahma. And he contributed this to a magazine called the Atlantic Monthly. And it's very interesting. And when we read the Bhagavad-Gita, you'll actually be able to identify this particular verse. And this is how he wrote this in his poem. He says, if the red slayer think he slays, or if the slain think he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways. I keep and pass and turn again. And so this was, and then he's also saying this, that I owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad-Gita. It was as if an empire spoke to us, nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us. So this is Emerson, who's a great thinker, and he was very inspired by the Bhagavad-Gita.
And this is Thoreau. He says, in the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal, hard to pronounce, philosophy of the Bhagavad-Gita, in comparison with which our modern world and its literature seem puny and trivial.
So we see how so many of these great thinkers, they have derived, of course, Einstein. He talks about how the Bhagavad-Gita, when he reads the Bhagavad-Gita and reflects how God created this universe, everything else seems so superfluous. So we see how different people have actually read this Bhagavad-Gita and derived great inspiration. And in the same way, we can also, if we allow ourselves, we can also be touched by this great and very ancient knowledge, which it's actually very interesting. When we start reading the Bhagavad-Gita, I don't know if you will experience this, but both of us definitely experience it, that as old as it is, it's so relevant for our current times. And that's actually one of the signs of something that is that transcends time and space, that it never gets dated. You never feel at any point that they're speaking to a different group of people. You can immediately relate to it.
So this is a natural question you may be asking. What is the Bhagavad-Gita and why should I read it? And a few things we wanted to mention, that in the Vedic literature is like is an ocean of text. So you have the 4 Vedas, you have 108 Upanishads, you have 18 Puranas, you have Samhitas, Itihasas, and it's like a whole library. You can see in the number of verses, and it runs in the hundreds of thousands, probably even in million. And the Vedas, they talk about so many different things. Some of them may be even contradictory, because Vedas, they try to address the needs of people who are at different levels of spiritual advancement. So somebody, say for example, they just want to get something quick and easy, material benefits. So there are processes given in the Vedas for people who are just interested in material benefits. and somebody who wants to learn the yoga siddhis and get some mystic powers. So there are some sections of the Vedas that deal with those kind of needs. And there are people who are then genuinely seeking knowledge. The Vedas deal with that.
The Vedas also, interestingly enough, and I think somebody just mentioned about Ayurveda, which I have studied. It also deals with medicine. Ayurveda comes from that. And diplomacy, and some of you might even know about Vastu Shastra, and some of you are trying to study astrology. So astrology is another big. So all of these sciences, mathematics, all of these things are actually described in the Vedas. And here is something that might actually take you by surprise. So now we're already talking about all these so many books, and you would look at them and go, how on earth do you actually read all these books in one lifetime?
And even if you read them, it's hard to make coherent sense sometimes, because you may feel tossed around because, oh, this book says this, but this book says the opposite. Now how do I make sense out of it?
So first, of course, is the quantity, and how do you even read that? And then there's another challenge, and this is the biggest challenge of all, which is this language that it is written in. It's written in Sanskrit. Now here is a little fact for you, that in order to actually learn Sanskrit so that you can actually understand these books, they say that you actually need at least 12 years of your life where you're not studying anything else. Just sitting with a teacher and just studying Sanskrit for 12 years. That's when, that's the key to enter into this great library. So understanding that the impossibility of this task for people like us with shorter attention spans, the Bhagavad-Gita kind of takes the essence, the cream. It's sort of like the cream of this milk, and takes it out and presents it in a very sort of condensed way with only 700 verses. And we would say 700, that's a lot. But compared to the thousands and thousands of verses that are there in the Vedas, 700 is, like you're saying, it's just like a cup.
It's like a cup. It's like our morning cup of water or tea or whatever, coffee. And the other interesting thing about the Bhagavad-Gita is that although it brings out the essence of all the Vedas, the Bhagavad-Gita also addresses the need for a wider audience. This is a very unique book. So it's not just about a particular kind of practitioner. It addresses the need for somebody who is into karma yoga, somebody who is into jnana yoga, or somebody who is into Ashtanga yoga. So it addresses the need for different kinds of people. But at the same time, it also brings out what is the best according to the speaker, Lord Krishna, who is the origin of all the Vedas. So this is a book that was actually spoken by God himself, who is the source of all the Vedas. And here he's just giving his own, just like the mother. Reserves the best advice for her dearmost child. So here Krishna is giving the advice from his heart to every living entity. This is what I really like you to look at and consider. So the Bhagavad-Gita doesn't appear as a separate book in the Vedic context. It appears inside another literature, great literature called the Mahabharata, which was also written by Vyasa. And Vyasa wrote the Mahabharata because after writing the Vedas and Upanishads and all these, he felt a little bit concerned about common people like me, that hey, Loka doesn't know the Sanskrit so much, and how are people of this age going to learn and understand these Vedas? It's impossible. So he presented, and as we know, we are all addicted to, we all like stories. So what he did was he presented the knowledge of the Vedas in this great story-like form called the Mahabharata, which is the story of the Kauravas and Pandavas, and very expertly put the Bhagavad-Gita in the middle of this great literature, so that people, when they read the story of Mahabharata, they will also gobble up Bhagavad-Gita, and they will understand that a little bit. So it's like a child who doesn't want to take a medicine. The parent puts the medicine into a sugar pill and then gives the medicine along with that. So that was Vyasadeva's attempt. So
I guess we can continue.
Yeah. Any questions or anything, comments so far? You can type that in the chat.
Yeah. Let's see. Does this directly correlate to the Yoga Sutras, 8 limbs?
In some ways. I haven't fully read the Yoga Sutras, but some of the main points of the Yoga Sutras are presented here, like the how to control the mind and the senses and remove the senses from the vrittis of the senses, to remove them and detach them. So Bhagavad-Gita talks about practical ways to do that. It talks about our identity, and so a lot of things from the Yoga Sutras are addressed here.
The Ashtanga Yoga is actually a chapter, and so it is talked about.
But it doesn't go to the technical details of how to perform the Ashtanga Yoga. Krishna generally talks about what Ashtanga Yoga is in few, like 4 or 5 verses, and then there is a discussion between Arjuna and Krishna about what is practical right now.
Yeah, because the Bhagavad Gita actually talks about many different yoga systems.
Right.
So Ashtanga Yoga is one, and it also talks about Karma Yoga, talks about Jnana Yoga, talks about Bhakti Yoga. And then if one wants to practice that particular yoga system, there are many more books. Like for example, we'll talk about Bhakti Yoga in the Bhagavad Gita, but in order to understand the practical application of the Bhagavad Gita, then there are teachers, the Bhakti teachers, who provide us greater guidance of how to apply that knowledge. So that's a good question though.
And as Omji is saying, the pragya aparad, which is the offense of the intelligence, is described in chapter 2.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. The pragya aparad is also a concept that is in Ayurveda, and we'll talk about it, how the intelligence might not sometimes cooperate, right? Even though we may know what is the right thing for us to do. So we'll pause here and just see if you have any questions before we proceed. And again, like I said, just write your question on the
chat box.
The chat box, so that way. And if there's nothing, then
we'll continue.
Okay.
Okay.
So here is the other thing. Now somebody, and this is actually a very important part of understanding the Vedic knowledge. It's knowledge that is connected, because we're trying to practice bhakti.
Where is it coming from?
Yeah, and bhakti means connection. So a very natural question that one should ask, according to this tradition of the Vedic tradition, is where does this knowledge come from? Is it
just like any other
information that we get? We want to know who has spoken it, what is the source of that, and what is there any even line. So the Bhagavad Gita, actually, what we are going to study, actually the knowledge that is contained there is presented. And that knowledge actually comes through a unbroken chain of teachers, and you can actually trace that lineage all the way to 5,000 years old. And
so it's like getting a mango from a ripe mango from a tree. Somebody is sitting on the top of the mango tree. They just drop the mango. If they just drop the mango and it falls on the ground, the mango may get damaged. And versus if there is a chain of people through which the mango is passed from the top to the bottom of the tree, so the mango is preserved. So similarly, this knowledge is passed in a chain. The knowledge that we are going to present is being passed in a chain of unbroken chain of teachers who do not add their own interpretation. They just explain what they have received according to the realization and time, place and situation, but the conclusions are kept the same without any changes, addition or subtraction.
And that's kind of what adds to the authenticity of this knowledge, because otherwise anybody could wake up one morning and say, oh, I had this, I saw this big light and now I'm going to teach. And so this tradition actually requires a certain standard, a certain foundation on which that knowledge can be built, and so here we have what we are going to be presenting in all of these different weeks coming up is knowledge that is being received through this chain. And you can read this, Krishna to Brahma, to Narada, to Vyasa, Madhava, Padmanabha, and then you can see this is more recent. This translation of the Bhagavad Gita that we are studying is actually by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who came to the West 50 years ago on a cargo ship with just some books on the order of his teacher Bhaktisiddhanta, who told him that people all over the world are actually going to be looking for this knowledge because times are going to be hard and it's going to be confusing. And so for the longest period of time, this knowledge was actually contained in the ancient temples and monasteries in India, and it was unheard of. This knowledge was kind of kept almost like a precious confidential secret. And the teachers in the recent years came to see that this knowledge is actually meant for everyone. Just like the sun rises in the east, but we don't say that the sun is eastern. The sun is meant for everyone. So this knowledge actually goes beyond any kind of racial differences or gender differences or even religious differences. And this is knowledge that can be received by anyone and everyone, and it can be applied in whatever sphere of life that we may be in.
So the main qualification of every link in this chain is that they preserve the conclusions of the previous teachers, and nobody tries to supersede or write their own unique. It's like the electricity. If the electricity is coming from the powerhouse, we want it to be maintain the original frequency, and so if the frequency will change, then all the devices in our house, they will burn down. So similarly, this knowledge is so important that we want to preserve the authenticity of the knowledge.
So this is something that those of you who are interested, we can actually send you a copy of this unbroken chain.
Yeah.
It's also there in the Bhagavad-Gita before the first chapter. So you can also take a look at this unbroken chain. Here is something. So like we said, the Bhagavad-Gita, we mentioned that it's something that can be actually studied by anyone, and it has no there's no bar that only this person only people of this particular country or this particular tradition can study it, and it can be utilized in many different places.
Because sometimes people wonder, growing up in India, you hear that Bhagavad-Gita is only meant for, say, people who are at a certain age or older age, and in the young age people should not be studying the Bhagavad-Gita, or only if somebody dies in your family, then you study Bhagavad-Gita. So it's kind of revered and worshipped, but not really studied or applied in a general way for whatever wrong reasons. So we just wanted to bring out that point that the Bhagavad-Gita was spoken to Arjuna for a specific reason, that he was a householder, he was a family person who had responsibilities, and therefore Bhagavad-Gita was spoken to him rather than to great sages who were present at that time. Krishna chose Arjuna to speak this Bhagavad-Gita so that a common person who's struggling with problems in his life, they can take advantage of this great literature and really apply. So it's meant for everybody.
Also, I was thinking that this is a question we ask many times when we are on when we attend these vegan festivals, and we're talking to people and we say, why do you think a book of spiritual knowledge would be spoken right in the middle of a battlefield, right before a battle is about to begin? And we can understand that at so many different levels, but one way to understand that is that if one can be spiritual in the midst of a battlefield, then you can be spiritual, and that excuse has been taken away from us, that my life is too difficult, I have so much to do, or I'm so stressed out. In fact, I think there's a funny saying where it says that if you stand on the shores of an ocean thinking that when the waves subside, that's when I'm going to go take a bath in the ocean, then one can actually just stay there forever and never really be able to take a bath. So the point being that this knowledge is actually meant to be utilized in the midst of our crazy, chaotic lives.
Right.
And we don't have to wait for that chaos to subside, and this is why this book is actually spoken on a battlefield.
I mean, it is a book that will help us to get rid of the chaos and let the chaos settle down.
And this is again
earlier people thought that Bhagavad Gita is for people who are seeking some spirituality or on a spiritual journey, but as time has passed, more and more people are, especially in the corporate world, they are recognizing the wisdom that is contained in the Bhagavad Gita, that is so relevant. They're finding it so relevant to corporate management and making the work a better place.
We found this so interesting that there's an article that we just read where it talks about how in the earlier years in business management schools, the book that was actually used, this was 2006 article, and it said there was a study that showed that the approach of management was more based on this very famous Chinese classic called The Art of War, and that was sort of the approach to management, and that article said that starting from 2006 onwards, that book has actually been replaced by the Bhagavad Gita. And what they're finding is that the Bhagavad-Gita has a different, so this Bhagavad-Gita is actually being used in management schools, and they're using the principles to teach, people who are going to be going to be our future CEOs and stuff like that, how to apply these principles. And some of the principles that they talk about is that good leaders are selfless. They take initiative and focus on their duty rather than obsessing over outcomes or financial gain. And then the magazine also said that the Bhagavad Gita was popular because for both organizations and individuals, it is a gentler, more empathetic ethos that resonates in the post-tech bubble, post-Enron Zeitgeist. It's also probably more in sync with today's concepts such as emotional intelligence and servant leadership. Actually, our son, he goes to UPenn, and in his college there's a professor called Dr. Adam Grant, and he's considered to be like a celebrity professor, and I've heard some of his lectures, and it's very interesting as someone who's teaching in a business management schools. He's continuously speaking about, like businesses having this sort of like very myopic view that it's about me, my profit, and sort of expanding that to how is this benefiting the society, and actually they're saying that approach is actually more beneficial for the bottom line in the longer run, and of course I'm sure for the environment as well. So the Bhagavad Gita is actually very relevant for even our practical day-to-day life. Maybe we can pause here and see if there are any. Okay, we have 7.
So we'll take any couple of comments or questions.
Somebody
you can type your question.
Yeah, please type your question. Is Business Week correct? Is it really possible for a text such as Bhagavad Gita to resonate more or less with a given cultural climate? Yeah, and I guess we are going to address these questions. So what we are going to do, maybe, let's finish this slide and then we'll come back to your questions.
Yeah.
And those questions that we cannot take, we'll take them tomorrow and day after.
Yeah.
But those are all excellent questions, so keep them coming.
Okay. So we'll continue with our next section, which is why Gita. You can tell the story.
Oh, I like telling stories a lot. So sometimes, people might say, well, the Bhagavad Gita is a great book, but then, it's not an easy book to understand. And even if and sometimes and I can attest to that as well, that, you read the Bhagavad Gita over and over again and you say, oh, did I ever read that? And, really, I have gone through this before. So it almost feels like you're sort of going through a book that, you're just not getting it, right? So there's a story like that about a grandfather and his grandson, and he said, well, I've been trying to read this Bhagavad Gita and I just don't get it, and so what's the point? I study it and I forget it. So the grandfather, he was a very wise person, so he had this coal basket. So he told his grandson that you take this coal basket, and he took out the coal, and he said, you run off to this lake and fill it with water and bring this water back. And so the grandson said, oh, I can do that. So he ran off to the lake and filled it with water, and then he brought it back. And of course, as we can understand, along the way the water was the basket couldn't hold it. So then the grandfather said, hey, you have to run a little bit faster. You just spilled all that water. So then he went back again and again filled it up and again ran. And again, of course, the water was... So he said, there's no way. This basket cannot really contain this water. What's the point? So the grandfather insisted that he should keep doing this a few more times. And so just to make his grandfather happy, he did it. And then finally he got frustrated and he said, what's the point? This is not really happening for me. But then the grandfather said, so now can you take a look at this basket? And then the grandson took a look at that basket, and he could see that coal basket, which had become quite dirty and quite dark because of all the coal, had actually that water had washed it away. And now it looked sparkly and clean and like a new basket. And so that's kind of the point, that we may feel like we are reading it and so much of it is just getting dropped along the way, and we don't really, but as we keep approaching it over and over and over again, we will actually see the transformation. And so one just has to, the thing with this is just patience, like just staying with it, I think is more than half the battle won.
So just like to read this beautiful purport or writing by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami about the Bhagavad-Gita, what this is and what we can expect to get out of it. So give me a second, I'll share the screen.
And then we'll pause.
So, just what is the Bhagavad-Gita? The purpose of Bhagavad-Gita is to deliver mankind from the nescience of material existence. Every man is in difficulty in so many ways, as Arjuna also was in difficulty in having to fight the battle of Kurukshetra. Arjuna surrendered unto Shri Krishna, and consequently this Bhagavad-Gita was spoken. Not only Arjuna, but every one of us is full of anxieties because of this material existence. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence. Actually, we are not meant to be threatened by non-existence. Our existence is eternal, but somehow or other we are put into asat. Asat refers to that which does not exist.
So that is just a little taste directly from the book.
You can read this also. This is nice.
Okay, so we'll just read one more paragraph. So out of so many human beings who are suffering, there are actually a few who are inquiring about their position as to what they are, why they are put into this awkward position, and so on. Unless one is awakened to this position of questioning his suffering, unless he realizes that he doesn't want suffering, but rather wants to make a solution to all suffering, then one is not considered a perfect human being. Humanity begins when this sort of inquiry is awakened in one's mind. In the Brahma Sutra, this inquiry is called Brahma Jigyasa. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Every activity of the human being is considered a failure unless he inquires about the nature of the Absolute. Therefore, those who begin to question why they are suffering or where they came from and where they shall go after death are proper students for understanding the Bhagavad-Gita. The sincere student should also have a firm respect for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such a student was Arjuna.
So, I think we are done with our presentation for today.